An RCMP sergeant says that traditional values are an indicator of extremism.
A non-partisan think tank is raising doubts about the significance of abolishing interprovincial trade barriers, calling the efforts political theater.
A growing number of patients are dying in British Columbia while stuck on lengthy wait lists. Hello, Canada. It's Thursday, July 10th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Isaac Lamoureux.
And I'm Geoff Knight.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. An RCMP sergeant says that Canadians who believe in traditional values are likely extremists. The comments come from RCMP Staff Sergeant Camille Habel, who told CBC News in an interview that Canadians should be on guard for family members and friends who are being radicalized, giving the example of someone who changes their views and holds traditional values. Habel said, quote, "Radicalization in general quite often will show in people isolating themselves and changing their behavior, like changing what they're saying on a subject, like becoming more extremist. If someone you know believed in equal gender rights, but all of a sudden they are leaning towards like traditional values, it might be a sign that they're becoming more extremist." Habel said that extreme views are only illegal once acted upon in a violent or unlawful manner. Habel's comments come in the context of the recent arrest of 4 Quebec men who were charged with facilitating terrorist activity after an alleged extremist plot to forcibly take possession of land in the Quebec City area by creating an anti-government militia. True North reached out to the RCMP for comment, though no response was given. Traditional values refer to the principles and attitudes that have been central to the foundation of the society in question, often placing a premium on the importance of family, religiosity, discipline, and patriotism. Traditional values are associated with conservatism, whereas their counterpart, progressive values, are often associated with left-wing ideologies. Habel's comments generated significant backlash from Canadians who adhere to traditional values but reject the characterization of being extremists. Ron Chinzer, a former Conservative candidate and host of Juno News' new Friday show, The Crime Report, expressed that the RCMP would classify basic and popular views that Canadians far and wide hold as being extreme in an interview on The Candice Malcolm Show. Chinzer said, quote, "What we see here is our national police force utilizing the most basic concept of every religious group that a strong family is a strong community. And now we're being told by our national police force that any pivot back to that, to revalue family values as we know it here in Western society, is actually moving towards an extremism." People's Party leader Maxime Bernier mocked the idea that traditional values may be a sign of extremism, demanding that he be arrested by the RCMP. So, Geoff, does the RCMP have a distorted view of what qualifies as extremism?
Well, Isaac, I'd say yes, the RCMP's view of what qualifies as extremism appears distorted, particularly in its broad and subjective framing of traditional values as a potential red flag for radicalization. Abel's assertion that a shift towards traditional values, such as valuing family, religion, or patriotism, might indicate extremism, especially when someone moves away from beliefs like equal gender rights. And this assertion stretches the definition beyond its conventional boundaries. Extremism, under Canadian law, is typically tied to violent or unlawful acts, as Habel herself noted. Yet her example implies that ideological shifts alone, absent any violent intent, could warrant suspicion. This contrasts with the criminal code's focus on terrorist activity, which requires evidence of planning or executing violence, as seen in the recent arrest of 4 Quebec men for an alleged anti-government militia plot. The backlash from figures like Ron Chinzer, a former Conservative candidate, and Maxime Bernier, People's Party leader, underscores this distortion. Chinzer on the Candice Malcolm Show argued that labeling a return to family values, core to Western society, as extremist misrepresents widely held beliefs, suggesting the RCMP is overreaching into personal ideology. Bernier's mocking demand for arrest further highlights the absurdity felt by those who see traditional values, embraced by 54% of Canadians, as mainstream, not radical. The RCMP's stance, linked to its monitoring of the Quebec case, seems to conflate cultural conservatism with the violent extremism it's tasked to prevent, a leap unsupported by data. Only 0.02% of Canadians were investigated for extremism in 2024. This suggests a skewed lens that risks alienating citizens and undermining trust in the force's impartiality.
Yeah, and Geoff, just something I wanted to say quick about Chinzer. He is not just a politician. He actually began his career in law enforcement in 2003 with the Peel Regional Police. And then in 2006, he became a sworn constable with the Toronto Police Service. And then over 2 decades, he advanced his career to become a lead investigator and specialized in organized crime and intelligence work. So his comments around the law here hold more weight than just some measly politician.
An independent nonpartisan research institute is calling Prime Minister Mark Carney's internal free trade reforms in response to U.S. President Donald Trump political theater. In a report released Monday, titled The Premier's New Clothes, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives argues that the political, media, and public spheres have greatly overestimated how much hidden interprovincial trade barriers were holding back the country's economy. The report reads, quote, in reality, the alleged costs of interprovincial trade irritants have been vastly overstated, as virtually all goods, services, and investment flows freely across provincial borders. According to the study, while the efforts of premiers and provincial governments will have minimal impact on the national economy, the proposed changes could be detrimental. On June 30th, the federal government removed its remaining exemptions under the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, including protections related to fisheries, passenger rail services, and marine transportation. The Liberals also passed the Free Trade and Labour Mobility in Canada Act and Bill C-5, which aim to fast-track project approvals and reduce internal trade restrictions. But critics say the government is exaggerating the benefits while downplaying the risks. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives warned that the broader push towards mutual recognition across provinces, backed by new federal and provincial legislation, could spark a regulatory race to the bottom that undermines public interest rules on workplace safety, the environment, and consumer protection. The group warns that the new approach gives more power to premiers and prime ministers to override regulations without full public or legislative scrutiny. Carney has also faced questions over ethics issues tied to Bill C-5. The Conservatives amended the bill to remove dangerous loopholes that would have allowed ministers to bypass key accountability laws. So Isaac, if lowering interprovincial trade barriers is not as much of a pressing issue as we've been led to believe, why is Prime Minister Mark Carney pursuing this goal as central to his government's agenda?
Yeah, Geoff. So Prime Minister Mark Carney might be pursuing internal trade reforms, not necessarily because interprovincial trade barriers are a major economic obstacle, at least according to this think tank, but rather as a political response to external pressure, particularly from US President Donald Trump, and as a way to project economic leadership and heightened trade tensions. We know, for example, how much Carney used the Trump tariff threat to persuade Canadians to vote for him during the recent election, even when, in some cases, these were already secretly handled behind closed doors, despite what he presented to the public. Blacklock's reporter even revealed this week that some documents showed that the Privy Council was polling main themes of the Liberals' Elbows Up campaign months before Trump ever imposed tariffs, finding that Canadians were terrified of mass layoffs. So, according to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, Carney's reforms are more about optics than substance. The report, as you said, describes the reforms as political theater, noting that virtually all goods, services, and investment flows freely across provincial borders already. But the reforms give the appearance of bold economic action while allowing the federal government to prioritize trade and investment by Canadian or foreign firms, but at the cost of undermining environmental protections, workplace safety, and consumer safeguards. In other words, Carney's focus on lowering internal trade barriers may serve political and symbolic purposes, positioning his government as pro-growth and pro-unity in the face of foreign trade threats, rather than actually solving a meaningful economic problem. Nearly 1,600 patients died while waiting for care in British Columbia's interior health region last fiscal year, marking the highest number of waitlist deaths in 6 years and renewing urgent calls for healthcare reform. According to data obtained by secondstreet.org, 1,364 patients died while awaiting diagnostic imaging, and another 222 died while waiting for elective surgeries in the 2024-25 fiscal year. Interior health includes major BC communities of the province's interior region, like Kelowna. Second Street's communication director, Dom Lusick, said, quote, "It's been 6 years and waitlist deaths are still getting worse in and around Kelowna. This is a failure of the healthcare system, plain and simple." Interior Health's documents show that 39% of patients who died while waiting for diagnostic scans had been on the waitlist longer than the region's priority wait time targets. CT scans accounted for the largest share of diagnostic-related deaths at 584, followed by ultrasounds and echocardiograms. Among surgical waitlist deaths, the most frequently cancelled procedure were cataract surgeries, knee replacements, and stent procedures. Interior Health acknowledged that 38% of these patients had been waiting longer than the recommended clinical benchmarks. The data comes amid heightened scrutiny over BC's crumbling health infrastructure. The shutdown of Kelowna General Hospital's pediatric unit earlier this year triggered widespread backlash, including the resignation of CEO Susan Brown. One case involved a 3-year-old child given fentanyl for pain management due to a lengthy surgical wait time. Second Street estimates that at least 15,474 Canadians died while waiting for healthcare between April 2023 and March 2024, though the actual number may exceed 28,000 due to data gaps. Second Street previously highlighted that almost half of Canadians were avoiding healthcare due to overwhelming wait times. Between 2018 and 2024, nearly 75,000 Canadians have died on wait lists. So, Geoff, what will it take for provinces to take action and reform their healthcare systems?
Well, Isaac, for provinces like British Columbia to take decisive action and reform their healthcare systems, several critical factors must converge. First, sustained public pressure is essential. Data showing 1,364 deaths awaiting diagnostic imaging, which is 39% of past targets, and 222 surgical deaths, 38% overdue, in Kelowna and beyond, has sparked outrage, with Dom Lusick calling it a failure. The resignation of Kelowna General Hospital CEO Susan Brown after the pediatric unit closure and a 3-year-old receiving fentanyl due to delays signal a tipping point. But provinces need louder organized protests like the 2023 Vancouver healthcare rally with 5,000 attendees to force accountability. Second, financial incentives or penalties from the federal government could spurn action, with Second Street estimating 15,474 to 28,000 national waitlist deaths from April 2023 to March 2024 and 75,000 since 2018. Ottawa could tie Canada Health Transfer Funds, $45 billion in 2025, to measurable reductions in wait times, pressuring BC and others to overhaul triage and staffing. Third, evidence-based policy shifts are needed, such as adopting private-public partnerships, as seen in Alberta's 2024 pilot reducing surgical waits by 20%, or expanding telehealth, which cut diagnostic delays by 15% in Ontario's 2023 trial. Political will is the final piece. Provinces must overcome partisan gridlock, with BC's NDP facing calls to reverse its 2021 public-only care stance, especially as 48% of Canadians avoid care due to waits, per Second Street's 2024 survey. Only a combination of public fury, federal leverage, proven models, and cross-party consensus will likely drive the systemic change needed to prevent further deaths.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.